the cool part about the cybersecurity space is there's always another problem to solve. Like, we're never bored in terms of what's the next thing that we need to look at. Because we can't do the same things that we did 20 years ago and be successful. The technology has changed, the people has changed, the regulatory environments have changed, the clients have changed, they've evolved. So we have to continue to evolve. And the same thing I think can be said for us as humans also, right? I mean, we are at our peak when we are continually evolving and rising to meet a new challenge. That's where that growth happens. And you take a step back, and there's nothing better than, getting to the top of the mountain and taking a minute to survey the landscape and understand what you've accomplished.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the All Innovation, the AI podcast. Once again, Keenan Hart, joined by Mr. Dante McLean as we host this show for you. We've got Jon Waldman here with us, who is the president, partner, co-founder of SBS Cybersecurity. Jon, welcome to the show, man. Super excited to have you here.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. I am honored, and it's a pleasure.
So this question goes out because Dante might have a little bit of a shared life experience with this. Before you started SBS, on your LinkedIn profile, it shows that you had a company from 2003 to 2004 called Bulldog Media Group, Inc. What was Bulldog, man?
Well, that was actually kind of my first, what I would call my big boy job, right? So I grew up living on a farm, and then when we moved off of the farm, I worked for my mom at at our family drugstore. And then various jobs around here, like worked at the DSU library on campus. I, was a library dude, and worked at the Pizza Ranch. I don't know if you guys have pizza ranches or if you know what Pizza Ranch is, but local, Midwest chain situation. So that was kind of my first adult job. One of the owners is still a good friend and mentor of mine. His name is Darren Namkin, but at the time they were called Credit Soup. So they did a lot of digital marketing in the credit card payment space, a lot of connections. So they've been around quite a while and have built a really wonderful organization. So,
man, what an awesome story. Dante, why don't you share a little bit about your web development marketing days back in the day with Catalyst?
Oh boy. Oh, Catalyst. So yeah, in early days in college, I partnered up with a good friend of mine, and we started doing web design and development. We had no idea what we were doing. We were just young kids. People thought we were funny and a bit witty. And so they paid us money to build some apps, and overall it went well. But, as all young ventures go, it just didn't work out as we graduated from college, but it was a great learning experience. Jon, go ahead.
Now, I always want to bring those into the conversation because we all have a start, right? And I was hoping that Jon was going to talk about, the Bulldog Media Group is like the one thing that he recognized, and then he was like, I can't do this anymore, so I'm going to start SBS with, the very origin story.
Right. But you bring up a good point, because I was like a part-time graphic design guy. So I minored in graphic design in college. They didn't have a cybersecurity program yet while I was in undergrad school. So I thought, web design was interesting. And so I worked for a couple guys that are wonderful, and taught me a lot of stuff. But then I was like, all right, I'm not cut out for design and marketing. That's not my jam. I got a tremendous MP3 collection out of the deal. I made some good friends. Okay. I was the first place I ever worked that had a ping pong table and a fridge full of beer in the back room. But also learned some good lessons around my capabilities and what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. So I also learned to drink coffee there. I didn't drink coffee before I worked there. And I used to get a mug of coffee and just load it up with cream and just junk. So then I also had to learn to wean myself off of all of that junk at that point too. But lots of good stories from there, but a definite learning experience. So you rooted it out from me, Keenan.
There you go.
So since we're talking about the early days, I'd love to talk about the early days of just getting into the cybersecurity industry. In our previous conversation, we talked about, back then it wasn't even called cybersecurity. It didn't really even have a particular name. And so can you take us through what that journey looked like in the foundations of starting the company?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we were, when we first really got involved with this idea of cybersecurity, we were in our master's program at Dakota State University. And really how the idea first started was there were some financial institutions that had just reached out to the university knowing it was a technology school and said, can you help us with this, right? We're getting asked to do IT risk assessments. We're getting asked to do IT audits, and we don't even know what those things are. Can you help? So that's kind of how we got our initial start. We got pulled into, and we met in rooms on campus, as an example. There's a room that we still walk by when we go on campus called the Regents Room. I think it's still named that. It's been, involved in a number of different things since 25 years ago, really is about that time, 20 some years ago now. But we still see it and we had some really good startup ideas in there. But that's how we got that real initial start, was just some folks reaching out. There was a problem that needed to be solved, and that problem happened to coincide with what we were going to school for at the time. So it was really interesting from that perspective, but that's what we'd do. We'd meet in rooms on campus. We would meet in each other's apartments and in basements, maybe over a beer at the local watering hole, some of those types of things between the part-time jobs that we had and the college things, the lifestyles that we were living and all of that good stuff. But as we began to look at graduating from our master's program and started to get a little bit more traction and started to feel like we were actually onto something here, that's when we started having those conversations around, well, what does this really look like if we're going to do it as a business, as a career? And, as we started figuring this stuff out, there was 8 students and a professor that were involved. And so we whittled that down to 4 by the time that graduation came, and we kind of really made a full-time swing at this. And it's interesting because I wonder often times that there were 5 of us that were really pretty committed to this. And we always kind of said, we'll do 4, right? We'll start it with 4. Why not 5? I don't know that was ever a conversation, but that's kind of what the professor always said was, I'll take 4 of you guys. And one of the guys was getting engaged at the time and wanted a job that was a little bit more stable. And we still keep in touch, and I serve on an advisory board with him, and it's kind of fun to reminisce about that. But I wonder sometimes, would I have been number 5 that would have been like, hey, dude, go find something else to do. So if he didn't make that decision, I wonder what life would have been like a little bit different. But that's kind of the garage band origin story is, the second guitar player went and did something else, and we were a foursome with a professor, and that's just kind of how we got our start. I remember having a little graduation reception in our very first ever office. I had long hair like a hippie, and wore board shorts and not to Banks, but that was a whole different interesting thing too, because we were a bunch of 23, 24-year-old kids literally walking into banks and telling their bank presidents that they need to do things differently on an information security perspective, which half of the bank presidents at that time didn't even really use computers. So they were, in their 80s and well, this is how we've always run the bank. So it was a lot of uphill sledding, and you had to look the part and talk the part and learn the language and a whole different audience. But that's really kind of what we did for the first 6 months of SBS was, let's kind of figure out what this looks like and how do we do stuff. And we'd kind of go do the same thing over and over and over again. And that's after about 6 months of doing the same thing over and over and over again, we sat down and said, well, what would happen if we built some software to help us do this more effectively and efficiently? And so that's kind of how we got started in the software business, in addition to, the consulting and the testing business.
Man, I'm so interested what it was like as a young 20 something, right? Walking into a bank where you're sitting across the table from, a bank president who's 80 years old, and you guys are telling them how the future is going to look. Did you guys ever feel nervous, like a little bit of imposter syndrome during that time, or what was that like?
100%. Yeah, great observation there, because we had an idea of what we were doing and we were confident in what we were doing, but what we were doing was something that nobody had ever done before. In our space, right? And there was a time it's probably the 2006 timeframe. One of our very first ever clients had a regulator that showed up, and this was one of those old school banks. Roger Haugo, who passed away probably about 5 years ago, somewhere in there, had a bank, and in a little town. And there's a whole big story about, a family bank and whatnot. But he was one of those guys that didn't have a computer. And up until when he passed away and then they sold the bank, they still didn't have a website. This bank, even in, what did I say, even 2020, right? So if you wanted to do business with this bank, you had to literally go to the bank. They had 2 locations in 2 little towns. And my wife's uncle and her cousins live in one of the towns, and we talk about that every now and again. But they didn't have online banking, they didn't have mobile banking. You wanted to deposit a check, you went to the bank. You wanted to take money out, you used an ATM or you went to the bank. But he's one of those guys I'll never forget, because every time I would show up at the bank, he would hand me like a photocopied news article about something going on in cybersecurity in the world of technology. And he just kind of grunt at me and then, go into his office with no computer. But he knew it was important because this regulator had come and sat down with him and basically told him he didn't know how to run a bank, and which really ticked this bank president off. And he wasn't a guy he was a lawyer in a former life, so he was one of those guys that's like, well, I'll show you. But this examiner also happened to play this really big part in the SBS historical story also, because that was the first time that we ever really had a sit down powwow with a regulator. Mm-hmm. And not only did he tell the bank that they were doing all of the things wrong, he started to tell us that we were doing stuff wrong. He said that our IT audit looked like a risk assessment and our risk assessment was like an audit. And we're like, no. So they ended up calling in folks from Kansas City and Sioux Falls. And, we had this like big sit down 4-hour powwow about how this stuff all works. And at the end of the day, we came out victorious, if you will. Like we were able to demonstrate how the way that we were doing things was the right way to do things and why it was that way. So then they stayed on as a client for another few years, different story. But that examiner went around and beat up 6 or 7 or maybe even 12 other financial institutions in the region and said, you need to call these guys because they're doing it the right way. So without that like fundamental situation, SBS might not even be what it is today.
Dude, isn't it crazy to think about how this was not in the 70s? You know what I mean? We're talking about like modern day times where our guy John is going in and talking to regulators and is convincing them that they're doing it the right way and he has no idea what they're talking about. And then he becomes a referral agent to bring you guys business as well. What a cool story.
Yeah. And you think back, like I said, 20 years ago, we talk about this quite a bit in terms of how technology has changed, and it feels like it's a lifetime ago, but like we've experienced a ton of technology change in our lifetime. Like what, the iPhone is 14 years old this year. Can you imagine a time before the iPhone as an example? Facebook is 20 years old. And you think back to a time before social media, and thank God that there wasn't social media when I was growing up in high school. But it's just kind of crazy, because we were talking about banks, talking with banks about online banking and how slow online banking was to be adopted 20 years ago, right? And a lot of smaller community banks were like, what? You want me to take all of my customer information and put it on the internet for my customers to ask or to look up? That seems like a terrible idea. And then we did. And then it was mobile banking. Like, you want I put it all on the internet. Now you want to let customers access that information on their phones? Like, whoa. Not sure we want to do that. And then we did. And then it was peer-to-peer payments. And then it was cloud banking and cloud platforms and cloud email. And now we're talking AI, and quantum computing's right around the corner. So it's been a pretty wild ride over the last 20 years.
As I hear you tell that story, it really seems like you were able to spot an industry year early, obviously, and you brought order to the chaos of this new industry. So much so that regulators were modeling you or chasing you. What as businesses, industries, and culture evolves, right? A big part of kind of what you said is like cultural changes, buyer behavior changes, expectation changes. What part do you enjoy the most? Is it kind of those early days where you have to kind of figure out a new industry, figure out the new regulations, or as things mature and become more stable?
That's a great question. The answer is a little bit of all of the above. But there's certain folks that enjoy, like, I'm a problem solver. So I like stability also. So I enjoy a little bit of both. But the cool part about the cybersecurity space is there's always another problem to solve. Like, we're never bored in terms of what's the next thing that we need to look at. Because we can't do the same things that we did 20 years ago and be successful. The technology has changed. The people has changed. The regulatory environments have changed. The clients have changed. They've evolved. So we have to continue to evolve. And in fact, we're going to have our all-company retreat next week, and we're talking about our growth goals as an organization and kind of the why behind our growth goals. So that way, everybody's on the same page from a company perspective, right? 95 employees are asking, well, why do we need to continue to grow? Like, isn't it okay that we're really awesome how we are? But again, those things, nothing stays the same, right? The technology doesn't stay the same. Their clients don't stay the same. So we can't also stay the same. We have to find new and innovative ways to continue to push the envelope and help our clients achieve that next thing. And the same thing, I think, can be said for us as humans also, right? I mean, we are at our peak when we are continually evolving and rising to meet a new challenge. That's where that growth happens. And you take a step back, and there's nothing better than, getting to the top of the mountain and taking a minute to survey the landscape and understand what you've accomplished.
Yeah.
Let's take a minute to survey the landscape of like artificial intelligence right now. So we've seen another explosion of technology since November of 2022. Over the weekend, we all watched the Super Bowl, or maybe you didn't, but there was a commercial about how Salesforce is implementing a new digital label platform called called Agentforce. And so, one of the things you said in our previous conversation was we can be as secure as we want with all our processes and documentation, but the human is still the weak link in kind of our security apparatus, if you will. What do you think the future role of AI agents are going to play in kind of shoring up that human element for how AI plays in this financial security space and the cybersecurity space?
Wonderful question. First and foremost, one of the key messages that we talk about is no matter what we do, at least to date, right? We're not at the point where AI is starting to develop on its own yet. So that's why I say to this point, you have not ever been able to take the human out of cybersecurity or out of technology, because a human has to have the idea, a human builds it, a human codes it, a human packages it up, sells it, markets it. A human buys it, a human implements it, and humans use it. So you can't take the human out of that loop at this juncture. There are ways to build controls in and around the human variable there, if you will. But that's the tricky part is, and we try to be really cautious around how we talk about it, because humans can be a tremendous first line of defense if you train them and you get them to buy in and understand why it's important for the human element to be kind of your human firewall, if you will, right? But Humans are easily swayed. They are tricked. They are manipulated. There's a reason that it's the number one attack vector by bad guys, is because it's a whole lot easier to hack a human than it is to hack a firewall that's only programmed to do something a certain way. Like, it's really hard to work around it unless you find a vulnerability in the code. But humans want to be helpful. Humans, in general, are trusting, and we're especially if you work in a customer service industry, we're all trained to be helpful to our customers and to say yes. Like, how can we help you solve a problem? Especially in the U.S. It's a little different when you get outside the U.S. But you ever go to a restaurant or walk into a gas station or something like that, and somebody starts telling you their life story because you asked a question, and you're like, whoa, we don't do that in other folks don't necessarily do that in other countries. I just think that the human profile and the psychology behind cybersecurity is super fascinating. But I've digressed. So back to your original question. I think that there's a high probability that AI agents, especially in the world of cybersecurity, play a massive factor into analyzing behavior and stopping that behavior. Like, let's say I get an email and I go click a link, there's an AI agent that pops up, and instead of something bad happening, and we see it a little bit now too with some antiviruses that are behavioral based rather than your traditional signature based antiviruses. But an AI agent or something like that saying, hey, that's a really bad idea. Let's not do that, and here's the reason why. With some antivirus platforms today, you just get denied. This has been blocked. With an AI agent, there will be built-in training to help folks and explanations as to why. But AI is going to play a tremendous role in the world of cybersecurity, both on the positive, on the defensive side, and on the offensive or the attack side. From a bad guy perspective, we're already seeing that all over the place.
Yeah, humans are way too trusting. Just recently, last week, I sent a Nigerian prince about $100, and he said he was going to send me 10,000 back. Still waiting on that money. I trust it, but that's just kind of how the human experience goes. And to kind of double click on your example, I think about like a validation layer, right, of AI agents who can watch emails, can actually sort through an inbox, make sure that links aren't sketchy, and can actually be that middle layer of validation that we need to not get ourselves in trouble, because we are willing to click on things that we shouldn't be clicking on. And we've seen this in healthcare many times, financial institutions and things like that. So really excited for what the future looks like. It's going to be a really cool time.
Absolutely. And the flip side of that is attacks get better with the use of AI too. So we've got to be able to use AI on our end, both for cool, fun, innovative things, but also to level up our cybersecurity defenses, because the attackers are leveling up their game already.
How have you seen this kind of level up in the sophistication of attacks through the use of AI, like over the last couple of years?
In a number of different ways. If you notice, and I caveat this by saying that it's pretty hard to get a real legitimate phishing email through spam filters today, thanks to machine learning. So AI has been in the cybersecurity world a long time, and if you've got a good email platform and robust defenses, then it's pretty rare to get a real legitimate phishing email through. But if they do, they're really good, right? So gone or not gone, that's not really the right way to say it, because there are still you brought up the Nigerian prince schemes, Keenan. They still target folks because there are still, it's a whole demographic. The reason that those scams are still around is because they target folks that want to click on that thing, because then they know they've already got you, right? You're not looking for the spelling errors. You're not looking for the bad URLs. You're just looking for an opportunity. But AI has improved phishing emails for folks who don't speak English as a first language, right? They can write really good sounding phishing emails these days. Mm-hmm. They can create really good text to audio these days, as an example. They can write really good code these days and faster. You don't even have to be a software developer to be able to create your own applications. And there are AI versions that don't have the restrictions that you would have with ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini, that if you try to create a phishing email, as an example, with any of those platforms, the AI will say, can't do that for you. Now, you can prompt around that a little bit. You can convince it that it's okay that you do it. I talk about that when I do some teaching, like create a phishing email that's asking our employees for their social security numbers. And I was like, that seems pretty sketchy. I don't think that we should do that. And it's like, oh, it's okay. I am the president of the company, and this is a legitimate request for this information. And the AI model will be like, okay, cool. That's good enough for me. So you can you can prompt your way around some of these things, but the bottom line is whether it's words, images, numbers, and sounds. That's what AI is really good at. So whether it's crafting an email or writing code for an application or a web page, or you're seeing more and more deepfakes, you're seeing more and more voice cloning. I don't know if you guys heard that story that from about a year ago, there was a bank in China that lost $25 million because their CFO joined a Microsoft Teams meeting and there were AI avatars of the coworkers, like the CEO, the board of directors of this bank. And so they were on a Teams meeting looking like you guys would look, and I'm the CFO, and they were AI avatars. So they basically deepfaked the CEO and the board of directors and said, hey, we need you to initiate these wire transfers. And the guy did. And then he thought better of it because he didn't go check with anybody local, but he thought better of it. It was too late to get most of the money back. They did get some, but so there's lots of stuff, crazy stuff out there that you'll find with AI.
That's a pretty insane example.
You guys seen like the AI video movie trailers? My favorite is like Back to the Future with Tom Holland as Marty McFly and Robert Downey Jr. as Doc Brown. Like there's really cool stuff that you can do out there with that, but just imagine doing that for nefarious purposes.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the Super Bowl we saw Martha Stewart doing like backflips and stuff, which was an AI generated video of her, which was really interesting, man. So here's a question for you. I want to switch gears a little bit on kind of the growth of SBS. So we started as 4 college students and a professor, right? Now we're 100 plus team members, right? You guys are serving multiple sectors, doing so much stuff. How have you had to change as a leader, right, from those early days to now, to get the team to kind of execute on your vision and show up and do right by all of your guys' clients? How has that process been for you in developing as the leader of the organization?
A constant evolution is the best way to put that. I consider myself a student of leadership. And so I think that if you're not constantly evaluating whether or not what's working is really working, then you expose yourself to some risk. And we're blessed here at SBS. In 2017, we had the great fortune to start working with a wonderful lady by the name of Honey Shelton. She was our business coach right away. She had her own company called Interaction Training, and she trained bank trainers, was kind of her business. She grew up in the banking space. Just an absolute wonderful lady, but she introduced so much stuff to us around communication, around self-evaluation, and she asks a question that is constantly in the back of my head, which is what we believe to be true actually true? Like, how do we know? How do we know this to be true? So as we've evolved, from 4 college kids and we started growing and started building stuff. I mean, I failed as a leader multiple times. I was a manager of probably our first IT audit team, as an example. I helped build our IT audit processes, so on and so forth. And then we got that to a certain size, and then it didn't work anymore. My leadership didn't work anymore. And so then I switched gears and I went to go do a different thing. And I've had I'm fortunate enough to have to not be somebody that was easily terminated, because I was the founder of the company. But so I've had opportunities that other folks might not have had from that perspective, and then I led our consulting team for a while, and at one juncture it didn't work out. And then so part of it was because as a young leader, I was too focused on different times in my career on the wrong thing, right? The first was I was focused too much on the operational side of the world, working in the business, not on the business. And I also was very protective of my people to a fault at one juncture, at multiple junctures in my career also. So you try to shield folks from challenges, and really you're shielding them from opportunities. You shield them from criticism, and you're shielding them from an opportunity to improve. So, there's been a lot of learning that has occurred. But around the time that we started working with Honey Shelton, we really focused on our culture as a company. And we've always had a really wonderful culture here at SBS, just naturally. So it was more of a cultivation and a fostering of our culture rather than a dictation of this is who we are and this is who we want you to be. But we also had input from our employees as well. And we're very close with our employees. Like, we have 4 folks that are starting at the beginning of next week that I haven't met, but I'm fairly certain that I could, if you give me enough time, name all of our employees at our company. And we try to make it a big priority to reach out and be known by our employees. So we're not just some, floating heads in ivory towers, which we're not. We're involved with all aspects of our business. But we also run SBS as a people first organization. And we try to back that up as Honey would tell us, Honey became our CEO. We brought her on board as our chief strategy officer. She became our CEO. She was our CEO for a couple of years. She's transitioned back into the chief strategy officer role, as an example, and continues to be a wonderful coach and mentor and guide for us from all of those things. But as she would say, like, how do you know this to be true? We put words up on the wall, as an example, our core values, and she would often ask us, how do we know that to be true? How do you know you have a good onboarding process? You built one, wonderful, it looks great. How do you know it works, right? So how are you measuring? How are you testing? How are you having conversations to really back this stuff up? And so, those have ultimately become part of our corporate metrics, is our NPS score, which is, I don't know how familiar you guys are with Net Promoter Score, but yep. We're at an 80 right now, and have been for a good year, really, since we started measuring this. And from a eNPS score, an employee net promoter score, I think we're at a 65 or a 70 or something along those lines. So, we take great pride in that. And we know that people are going to come and people are going to go. But we really want SBS to be a place that people want to be, right? So that's kind of our ultimate mission, our ultimate cultural experiences for, we're not a big Fortune 500 company. We can't compete with the Googles and the Microsofts in terms of benefits and salaries and all of those types of things. But we do have a pretty wonderful culture and an amazing collection of humans that make SBS a pretty cool place that people want to be.
As you're speaking, one of the things you talked about was just being a great communicator. And part of being a great communicator is also being a great storyteller. How do you feel like you've maybe transformed or improved your ability to tell stories to affect culture, affect how people see you, and affect the employees that work for you?
Great question. Part of that comes from, we do a lot of speaking engagements. So a third of my time probably goes to speaking to groups or on webinars or doing podcasts or some cool, fun stuff like this. So part of that is that's a constant evolution also. So I'm always self-evaluating, like, am I a good storyteller? Like, I have a big picture goal to do a TED Talk someday. And I probably should get after that at some juncture and do something about it rather than just have it on a piece of paper. But like that's kind of I watch, like I mentioned, I'm a student of learning, and so I try to continue to consume as much of this content about being a good communicator, about being a good leader, and then self-evaluating myself. Like, what can I do better? What can I do to make a small tweak, 1% better, from learning a lesson about this, that, or the other thing. So but over the years, yes, a lot of work has gone into evaluating communication and trying to become a good storyteller. And I don't know if I do a good job or not. You guys might think that I talk too much, because my wife would probably tell you the same, but try to run that balance.
I think you're doing a great job, John. My question for you is, what do you think the future of cybersecurity is going to look like? Right? We talked a little bit about AI. We talk about quantum computing. How are all these kind of like synergies coming together to impact what the future of your industry looks like?
That's a big, heavy question. You mentioned AI and quantum, and they are going to influence how the world of security works more than anything else. If quantum fulfills even a third of its promise, then everything that everything that we've done up to this point is going to look like, we'll look back on it like, we used to talk on phones that were on a wall. There's a joke that when my now 14-year-old was probably 5 or 6, she goes, back when a long time ago, in the old days, back when cell phones were on the wall, it kind of like, it's going to feel like that, I think. And I don't know how long it's going to be, but AI is going to play a big role in that. There's going to be a lot of efficiency, a lot of automation. I think it'll improve cybersecurity as a whole, because you'll have better detection and mitigation capabilities. But the big message there is it's for everybody. There are a lot of businesses, there are a lot of individuals out there that say, well, I'm not a target, right? Nobody knows who I am. Nobody knows who my business is. Nobody's looking for me. I'm not big. Nobody knows what I have. Nobody knows what I do. And I would contradict that by saying, but bad guys don't care. Cyber attackers don't care, because to them, if you are connected to the internet, all you are is a number. They're going to find you. They can find you. They have found you. And they're just looking for an opportunity. And then once they are in your computer, once they're in your network, once they're on your phone, then they'll figure out who you are, where you are, what you have, and how much of that thing that you have. And then they'll figure out how to profit off of that, because that's what bad guys do.
For the average person maybe listening, sorry if you, maybe that's the wrong wording, the average person, but for the people listening to this today, what are some maybe basic steps from a security standpoint, just like the everyday person could start adopting so they can feel a bit safer when they're engaging online?
Great question. Basic things that I would tell folks are for an average consumer, right? So a little bit different from a consumer perspective than a business perspective, but for the average consumer, I would start by saying use multi-factor authentication everywhere that you can. Just turn it on. There's lots of apps. You can consolidate most of your multi-factor authentication, we call them tokens, right? But instances into one app, whether it's Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator or whatever you want to do there. But that is a tremendous barrier between a bad guy and your stuff. And most likely that's going to be your email or your bank account, your online banking accounts. And if you're using the same password for your email and your online banking accounts, please don't do that either. Or make sure you got multi-factor authentication on, because MFA is one step. Like, a bad guy could steal your username and password. He can't steal your MFA token, right? Mm-hmm. And if he does it, you get 30 seconds or maybe 60 seconds to act on it. And so you're just narrowing that window down pretty significantly. From a business perspective, one of the most impactful things that we see bad guys hack into is your email system. And I would challenge every business owner out there to ask themselves, is my email secure? And also, what's in my email? Because almost every organization that we work with is storing what you would call PII, or personally identifiable information that will get you in real trouble if there is a breach in their email system, as an example. And then they don't have multi-factor authentication on. If you're using Microsoft 365, if you're using Gmail, there are ways to lock it down so it's not a pain in the butt to access for you, but it does become much more of a pain in the butt to access for a hacker. So that's usually where we start with folks. Like, understand where your big risks are. Email, if you have a CRM, if you're of size enough to have a CRM, whether it's Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics or whatever you're using, Zoho, think about where your most important data is, and make sure that it's hard for a bad guy to access. Easier for you, but hard for a bad guy to access. And the number two thing besides that is make sure you have really good backups. There is no good excuse for not having world-class data backups today. There are more organizations that I know that have been shut down permanently or debilitated, to get significant losses by not having backups than by anything else, by not having good backups. So really know and understand your data backup world, and secure your email, and use multi-factor authentication for everybody. And those are kind of the three things that I would really bring up.
John, one of the traditions we have here on the podcast as we put the wheels down to kind of land is our previous guest wants to ask you a blind question.
Cool.
Now, their question is, if you could do your professional career all over again and go into a different sector of work, what would you do and why?
Ooh, that's a good one. I'm a bit stumped. I don't, I mean, it's going to sound real cheesy and corny, but I don't know that I would choose a different path. Like, I love the path that I've been on, the ups and the downs and the zigs and the zags, and to be where I'm at. But I'm also a student of gratitude. So, there's an element of that. So I don't really spend a lot of time thinking about if I would have done something different. If I would have ended up somewhere different, whatever it was that I would have done, I know myself well enough to know that I don't work well for somebody else. I have a wonderful relationship with my 50-50 partner, and we work very well together. But my wife and I talk about that. We're kind of unemployable, which is why we own our own businesses. But if I did do something else, I would have wanted to end up in a place that I could go snow skiing a lot more, and maybe play more video games. That would be, if I had to draw it up all over again. Otherwise, I'm good.
Well, John, why don't you take the last couple seconds here and tell us where we can find you, man? So either your personal accounts, right, on LinkedIn, things like that, but also how can we find SBS if people are interested in learning how they can be supported by your guys' organization?
Absolutely. So you can check us out online at sbscyber.com is our website, our educational website. If you're interested in cyber education, certifications, webinars, that kind of thing, is learning.sbscyber.com. So those are kind of our two platforms from that perspective. But we're super active on LinkedIn, SBS Cybersecurity on LinkedIn, or check myself out. I don't know that I have a super custom LinkedIn URL or anything like that. So you go to SBS Cybersecurity on LinkedIn and find me, or find me through LinkedIn the old-fashioned way, I suppose. I don't do Twitter or Blue Sky or too much of that other stuff from that perspective. But
well, John, we appreciate you coming on the show, man. This has been an absolute blast for everybody tuning in, watching, and listening today. That's been the pod. We'll catch you guys in the next one.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure, fellas. Appreciate it.